punched in. Next thing, if you'll all stand, move your hats for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Supervisor Powers.
Turned on. In this season of lights, miracles, preparation, peace, and goodwill, we remember our neighbors who have food and shelter insecurities. Remind us to be ever careful of and attentive to those who face this season with sadness and anxiety. We thank our Creator for all the blessings we enjoy here in Winnebago County. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, let's see if the mouse is in here.
Is there a motion for the adoption of this evening's agenda? Motion made and seconded. For all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Carried. Public comment. Anyone wishing to speak to the public at this time on anything having to do with Winnebago County may go to your mic, state your name and address, and you have 2 minutes to say anything you would like to address the board on.
Crystal Oaks, 388 388 Nassau Street, Menasha, Wisconsin 54952, Winnebago County Supervisor, District 2. I thought that you should all know that last night at the Menasha Common Council meeting, we had there was, not we, I'm a member of you guys, there was a presentation by the Fox River Navigational System Authority, and they have, the Menasha Lock can't be opened right now because of a fish called the round goby that is invasive. The Fox River Navigational System Authority was going to build an electric fence so that it would keep the goby out and we could use the lock. And they have pulled out of that project, so that electric fence is no longer going to be built. And Menasha has really decided to do nothing and just let the goby go. As soon as the goby is found in Lake Winnebago, it'll take about a year and they'll be able to open the locks. So that's the plan, and I thought you should all know because it's going to infect all of the watershed for the Fox and for the Wolf River once it gets through. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to the board this evening? Anyone else? Anyone on Zoom? Not hearing anyone else, we'll close that part of the agenda. Communications from clerk's office.
Good evening, everyone. We have a notice of claim from Matt Smits for damage to his vehicle caused by a county snowplow truck. This will be referred to the Personnel and Finance Committee. Then we have 2 petitions for zoning amendments that will be referred to the Planning and Zoning Committee. The first one is for Michael and Lisa Scott to rezone from A2 to R2. And the second one is from Tom and Lisa Comiskey to rezone from R8 to R1.
Just hold on. You wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That would be from rezone from A2 to R1 on my agenda.
Okay, then there's a mistake on the agenda because
That is parcel 0180440. Is that correct? Item 2,
It should be for parcel number 032060904.
That was the, item 2 is for the Lisa Scott, or Michael and Lisa Scott,
It should be R2.
018040.
That's correct.
That's item 2 under G. That would be rezone A2, from A2 to R1.
Okay, it should be R2. I have the agenda wrong. The correct
Thank you.
zoning should be R2.
Anything else?
And then I would just like to thank everyone that attended the county board Christmas party last night. I felt we had a very good time. So thank you, and then Merry Christmas to everyone.
Merry Christmas to you, too.
Reports from committees, commissions, and boards. No speakers. I have no speakers. Supervisor Swan.
UW Oshkosh Fox Cities Campus Trustees had a meeting on December 2nd. The meeting was very interesting, and I would like to defer to Walt Albrecht to make some comments. We had Tom Nelson, who made a disclosure in that meeting of the progress that we're having right now, and a change of use for the campus. Thank you.
We've got some other ones, and then if you want
Change
to
of
push,
user rather than use.
if you want to push your light to come in, I've got some other ones ahead of you. Supervisor Bender.
Fixed the date for the UW Education, Extension, and Agriculture. We used to meet on the third Thursday of the month. Now we're meeting on the third Wednesday of the month. So if anybody wants to attend tomorrow, we'll be at the Coughlin Center, or they can attend on Zoom.
Supervisor Gilbertson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Speaking of the UW Extension, at our last meeting, we brought up that we wanted to talk about mental health, especially during this holiday season. And they left me a little message for everybody. Good afternoon, members of the county board. While we know that the holiday season can bring joy and connection, for some it is highly stressful, lonely, and very mental health challenging. Factors such as financial strain, social isolation, and unrealistic expectations can exacerbate mental health conditions. In Winnebago County, we have roughly 11.6, or 1 in 10, who are requesting additional mental health help around this time of year now. What we can do to help is promote awareness, explore training opportunities, encourage social connection, support youth, and address stigma. If anybody has any questions or wants any resources, they can reach out to me. They have given me a list of resources that I can share.
Supervisor Pacetto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick update on the Industrial Development Board. At our last meeting, we did pass the updates to our policies and procedures, which essentially makes it a little bit more flexible for communities around Winnebago County as they embark on their economic development projects. And there was an interesting item that was added after the formal review of stakeholders throughout the county, and that was the ability to stockpile for a 3-year period some of these dollars if you're intending on a project that is going to cost a little bit more. So rather than having to spend it in 1 year, you're able to bank it for a 3-year period. And additionally, if you're partnering with another municipality adjacent to you on a project, a shared project that will benefit both, we have that flexibility built into the policies and procedures as well. Finally, at the last meeting, the per capita was divvied up amongst all the communities in Winnebago County. That letter hit most communities who will have been able to either vote on or will be voting on how they want to use the Industrial Development Board dollars. And I want to thank the board for their vote to add an additional $30,000. And while it doesn't seem like a lot, every little bit helps. And the communities that I've been in touch with have been very happy. Thank you.
Supervisor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From PNF, I would like to announce that we provided a $40,000 contingency loan, contingency for a feasibility study for the EMS, the problem that they were having with Oshkosh, and they're going to look into it. It was going to take at least five other towns that were involved with this, and it's including the town of Amaro and the town of Black Wolf, and that study is to be done over the next couple of months, and we hope to have a result on the study, at least brought back to PNF to take a look at it, and from there they'll go ahead and do their planning from.
Supervisor Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would invite people tomorrow to come to the Facilities and Property Management Committee. That meeting will be held at noon at the Knapp Street location. I bring that up because for the past 6 years at least, we've been working on an ordinance around responsible contracting and bidding in the county. Going back to 2018 or so, we'd heard about issues from the department head around contractors that in one instance at Parkview Health Center cost the county $40,000 because they didn't put locks in the doors, and we had to provide supervisors out there. And so for the past number of years, we've been, the committee has been working hard on creative solutions to head this off in the future. We've had presentations from the corporate counsel, the purchasing agent, or the past purchasing agent. So the committee last month decided we provided a model responsible bidder ordinance. At that time, we said we deliberate on it next month. Talked with Chairman Hintz. He said go ahead with it. Talked to the corporation council, gave it to her, and lo and behold, when we got the agenda, that's not what the will of the committee. So once again, it seems like the administration is providing some insight where this legislative body should have the insight and the knowledge to do so. So inviting folks, if they wish, to come and join us at the Facility and Property Management Committee tomorrow. Thank you.
Vice Chairman Fari.
Chairman, like the UW Extension Committee, the Land Conservation Committee for this county also will be changing its meeting date for the year 2025. This last year, we've been meeting on the first Thursday of the month. We will now be meeting on the first Monday of the month. Time has not changed. That's at 9 a.m. So starting in January, it will be the first Monday. Thank you.
Supervisor Albrecht.
Monday the 2nd, and people came out to give their public opinion. People were concerned now, and increasingly so, about the 5 community assets on that campus, those being number 1, the Barlow Planetarium, number 2, the Weiss Earth Science Museum, number 3, the Communication Arts Center, involving the theater, the auditorium, and the visual arts area. Thirdly, the University Child Center. People are outspoken, strongly in favor of retaining that. And finally, we heard from a new group of people supporting the community gardens on those grounds. We had a person speaking forward practically in each of those 5 areas, if not more than one person. What I'd like to do now is to paraphrase what Outagamie County Tom Nelson, executive, actually said, and this is from the draft minutes from the meeting. Outagamie County Executive Tom Nelson reported that he had serious conversations with stakeholders, and there has been a lot of interest from the Menasha Public School District and others in a long-term solution for the property. Nelson is anticipating more information to be shared at the January meeting of the trustees. That's a paraphrase. He was coming to us via Zoom on Monday, the 2nd. Our next meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, is Monday, January 27th at 1 p.m., correct? That is correct. All right. So increasing public interest about the status and the future of the Fox City campus. Thank you.
Not seeing anyone else. County Executives Report.
All right. Supervisor Buck, if you would, I just want to clarify what you said. The fair bidding was not on the,
No, it was on the agenda, but it wasn't what the board had asked the Corporation Council to draft.
okay. All right, thank you. Okay. I apologize for that. I thought we put everything through, so news to me, so I just wanted to clarify that. I just want to say thank you to everybody who came out to the Christmas party last night. It is nice for us to kind of get into a room, share some food, and remember we're all humans and get along. It was really a good time, and yes, that was me that got pulled over by Winnebago's finest. And I had a taillight out. It was a pleasant experience. Yeah. All right, I'm going to pause if there's any questions on anything on the agenda that anybody has for me before I get to appointments.
Are you going to jail?
I am not. I am not, but the fine village of Winnebago will be getting some of my hard-earned tax dollars.
We're just trying to keep up with the honor roll.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right. No questions? We're going to move on to appointments. For the Fox Valley Workforce Development Board, I'd like to appoint Carrie Mikesell. Do you want, would you like to do it individually, or you just want me to keep going?
Go right on and do them all.
Okay. For the Human Service Board, reappointment of Supervisor Karen Powers, Supervisor Ralph Harrison, and Miss Chris Knape to a 3-year term. Veteran Service Commission, reappointment of Supervisors Tim Patterson, Mr. Roy Rogers, and Mr. Tom Snyder for a 3-year term. And I just want to pause there for a second, let everybody know that the Purple Heart highway signs are installed and up on 21. That was a big push for Roy Rogers, and we're proud to get that done. Winnefox Library Board of Trustees, reappointment of Miss Samantha Goldman and Noah Cipher to a 3-year term. And before we get to a motion, I do have vacancies on the Human Service Board and Aging and Disability Resource Center for a supervisor. So if anybody on the board is interested in those positions, just please reach out.
Motion made and second for the approval of the names mentioned for appointments. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Carried.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. The only one that has asked to be excused tonight was Supervisor Stafford. So that's all that I have on that. And again, I want to thank all of you that were able to come last night. I know some that weren't that would have liked to have been there. It was a good time, good food, good hospitality, and it was very nice. And I also want to thank all of you that had anything to do with door prizes. That was great. Everyone went home with a door prize, and it was something that, those of you that got stuff, I'm not going to mention names. I know some got more, some got less or whatever, but I really want to thank you. And hopefully you know that, I know that I can point you out, but I'm not going to. So I don't know where it'll be next year, but we'll be looking around, although this last place treated us very well. So again, I thank you, and I'm going to do it now so I don't forget at the end. I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you and all your families. So, all right, that's all I have. We'll go into our presentation here tonight, which we're quite lucky to get. We'll have our Corporation Counsel, Mary Ann, go ahead and introduce.
So I'm happy to tell all of you that Andy Phillips, who is General Counsel for Wisconsin Counties Association, is gracing us with his presence. He has been counsel for decades, even though you wouldn't know that looking at him, but he has. And the purpose is basically to clarify the understanding of roles and responsibilities. And as you all have heard, and as I've told you, a county board in Wisconsin is considered a legislative body that sets policy through the adoption of resolutions and ordinances, comprehensive and strategic plans, and the county budget. So without further ado, I will leave you with Andy Phillips.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Awesome being back here. It's been a while since I've been here, and so it's nice to be back in Winnebago County. I assume my door prize is outside. I didn't get it last
It might
night.
have been on the left. It might be by the door.
Okay, I'll look for that later. I'm sure it's there. So as your Corporation Counsel mentioned, I'm Andy Phillips. I'm with Atolis Law. We have an office in Milwaukee. I have been representing the Counties Association and county governments throughout Wisconsin for the better part of 30 years now. And so tonight's discussion, I'm not going to call it training, I'm not going to call it education, because the one thing I have not done in my career is sit in your seats. All right? I've never sat in your seats to make the tough decisions that you make. And so I'd like to have a discussion tonight based upon observations I've made over the course of my career, what I've seen work, what I've seen not work. And then if you have questions, if you have comments, please ask those as we go through this presentation, because the point is to provide clarity when it comes to roles and responsibilities within Winnebago County. If we can get over the question of who is making the decision, we can get down to the real important stuff, which is how do we deliver effective and efficient services to our taxpayers. And so that's the goal tonight. With me tonight is Sarah Diedrich. She is here as a designated cheerleader. She agrees with every single thing I say. Is that right, Sarah? Thank you. She has actually been at this longer than I have. 31 years now? 33 years with WCA. She's Director of Outreach, County Engagement, and hors d'oeuvres, right? Did I get the, yeah. It's a long title, but she's here too. And so we have had this discussion with many, many counties. And so let's start this tonight with roles and responsibilities. I want to first provide a little bit of history, and this is challenging because I typically read off the slide on this one. I don't have these dates memorized. But if you look at the history of county government and think about it in context, I think that enlightens us as to why county government exists. As you're going to hear throughout this presentation, we're not like city-village government. We're not like state government, obviously not like the federal government. So why is it that we're different? Well, if you look at the history of county government in Wisconsin, it predates statehood. All right, it was territorial county government. And so in essence, the territory needed some sort of local presence in order to administer territorial affairs. And the same is true in 1848 when we adopted our state constitution, became a state, is that we needed a local presence of state government in all of the geographic regions throughout the state in order to administer state government issues at the local level. And if we think about it, going back to 1848, it took forever for an email to get from Madison up to Superior. So it was very important that we have people in place in Superior and all of the four corners of the state of Wisconsin to carry out that state function. And with the evolution, we see that from 1836 to 1901, we grew from 6 counties to 71 counties. We have the 72nd county created in 1961. Does anybody know which county that was? It was Menominee. That's right. What's the other unique feature of Menominee County? Does anybody know?
People.
Well, people are unique. That's right. It is. It's about 90% reservation land. That's right. But it's the only county in the state which is combined town and county government. So their county board also doubles as the town board in Menominee County. It's also the smallest board that we've got in the entire state. They have 7 members. So, if we look at the history of county government in Wisconsin, there was a grand debate when county government was formed. Were we going to follow what's called the commission model, or were we going to follow the supervisor model? In Wisconsin, like we have a tradition of this, is that we love local government. We really do. I think there was a study done about 10 years ago of per capita, how much local government do we have in each state? Wisconsin is 3rd on the list. We really, really like our local government. I think there's a tradition of wanting local elected officials, the people enacting policy, the people creating service and delivering service to be very close to those who are receiving that service. That's awesome. It also adds complications, but that's awesome. And so we in Wisconsin, we chose the supervisor model, which we tend to have large county boards. If you look at other states, California, Texas, states out west, they have this commission model. And so if you hear of your counterparts in different states doing different things, understand that there's no parallel between what we do in Wisconsin and what they do in those other states. Those commissioners in those other states, county commissioners, in Texas they call them judges, those county commissioners have significant responsibility over a singular aspect of that particular county from an operational standpoint. They are in control of multi-billion, with a B, dollar budgets. I think in Los Angeles County they have how many, Sarah? 7 commissioners, if I remember? 5. It's 5, and each one of them has responsibility for a multi-billion dollar budget. That's not the way we operate in Wisconsin. All right, and it's not just by circumstance and history. By law, the way we set up county government is we chose the supervisor model. So again, why is all of this important? Because I think it provides context. If we understood why we are formed the way we are formed, we can understand what it is that we do today. Because in a lot of ways, there's not a lot that's changed since 1848, believe it or not. County governments existed and it predates statehood. All right, so we've been around for a very long time. That's more than what we can say about cities, villages, and other units of government. All right, and so it's important to understand that historical context for what we do today. So I mentioned that we're different than cities and villages. If you look at the Wisconsin Constitution, chartered cities and villages enjoy constitutional home rule authority. And that simply says that at a local level, they get to control their own affairs the way that they see fit, subject to an enactment of the legislature of statewide concern. Baked into the Constitution. It's right there. Counties don't have that same privilege. We do not have constitutional home rule authority. Instead, we have statutory home rule authority. That wasn't introduced until 1985, and so we went from 1848, or even pre-1848, up until 1985 without any sort of recognition of home rule authority. Why is that important? Because again, if we understand historical context, why counties exist in the first place, it was to deliver state services at the local level. That's why whenever you read old Attorney General opinions, you read old court cases, phrases like an arm of the state or creatures of the legislature, that's why those phrases are utilized. I don't know about you, but that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up because we do a heck of a lot more than just the state's bidding, all right? We deliver vital services to the residents of Winnebago County who count on those services day in and day out. But, if you look at it from an organizational form, counties exist at the whim of the legislature. And so if the legislature tells counties to jump, we say, how high? How high? That's right. And that's just a reality. All right. Despite us being creations of statutes, despite us existing at the whim of the legislature, we still enjoy body corporate status. What does that mean? Well, that just means that we are separate and distinct from state government. We are separate and distinct from other levels of local government. we have our own independent authority, as limited as it may seem that is. So we do enjoy independence. As I mentioned, we have administrative home rule authority. I'll get into that in a moment. All counties are governed by a board of supervisors. That's required in the statutes, all right? Board size, it's vastly different all across the state. I mentioned Menominee County with 7. There's a county out there with 38. And so as often as you might say, oh my gosh, in Winnebago County, we got 36. There's a lot of us. There's a county that's more, 38. Does anybody know which one it is? Well, you guys all know that because you know that they're worse off than you are, so you pick on them, right? So our good friend Kurt Gibbs, the board chair in Marathon County, I always make fun of him. I say, Kurt, you got it so awesome. You got the biggest board in the state, plus you got an even number, so there's a chance for a tie. That's awesome. So yes, it ranges in size between 7 and 38. 15, 20 years ago, there was a big movement to reduce county board sizes. I know you all reduced by 1 in order to avoid a referendum drive to reduce even more. Isn't that right? That was probably 15, 20 years ago, as I recall. There are other counties that went through that process. I haven't seen that lately in terms of people saying that the county boards are just too big. But what I will say is this, is that do whatever works for you. I happen to think that a large legislative body makes sense. It does make sense. Makes things a little more cumbersome, a little more difficult, but oftentimes things are supposed to be cumbersome. Things are supposed to be difficult. When we talk about important policy initiatives, important policy debate, we ought to have divergent views. We ought to have representation from the people. That representation ought to be meaningful. So if we reduce the board size to a certain point, that representation is diluted. And so I happen to think that, a large legislative body is okay. Within limits, of course, but I think that's okay. Other counties may disagree, and that's fine to have a smaller board size. Point being is that you get to choose what that board size is going to look like. I mentioned administrative home rule authority, 2 very important statutes. I call them the freedom statutes. 59.03 sub 1 and 59.51 sub 1. Both of those statutes, again, came in 1985. In the debate leading up to 1985 from the Counties Association and county government as a whole was, look, you're asking us to do a heck of a lot. We are complex organizations, yet you're not giving us any ability or recognition to do what we need to do at the county level. And so the legislature said, you know what, you're right. Let's give you home rule authority. And so if you look at the language of administrative home rule authority contained in statute, it's very similar to the home rule authority that's granted charter cities and villages in the Wisconsin Constitution. Difference being is that it's in statute, it's not in Constitution. Statutes can be amended. Constitutions can be amended, but it's a little more difficult. So if we look at statutory home rule authority, every county may exercise any organizational or administrative power subject only to the Constitution and to any enactment of the legislature which is of statewide concern and which uniformly affects every county. All right? Now, I will tell you that this statute runs into conflict quite a bit in my world. As a lawyer representing the Counties Association and other counties around the state, there are things that counties want to do, and they want to say, we have the power to regulate or take action in this area, and the statute that gives us that authority is, boom, right there, 5903 sub 1. And so there's often a question, all right, well, has the legislature, in adopting a particular statute, taken away a county's ability to govern its local affairs as it sees fit? So you see conflict between certain other statutes and 5903 sub 1. I'll give you an example. When it comes to regulation of solar or wind energy, we've seen that debate come up very recently. Seems like every 5 years or so we have a really interesting land use issue that comes up in county government, and we're right at the front door of dealing with that issue. The latest happens to be green energy or clean energy, solar and wind systems. And the legislature adopted a law that simply said, when you have a solar siting application permit, here's the process you follow, here's what you do. When you have a wind siting application, here's the process, here's what you do. Several counties said, oh, we like that, but we also want to add our own conditions on this. Because after all, we're unique in Winnebago County. We do things differently than Outagamie, Calumet, other counties. And so do you think you have the ability to do that? Maybe. It depends upon the verbiage of the statute. And the only person in the world who is thankful that the legislature creates confusion and problems with this, who's the only person in the world thankful for that? Me. I'm a lawyer. Mr. Executive got it right. Your Christmas gift's on the way. Yes, it can be confusing, and it can be challenging a lot of times, because the legislature isn't exactly artful many times in the way that it builds out the statutes and how those statutes interact with county home rule authority. All right, there are three forms of county government. You have to choose one of these three. That was another legislative push in 1985, is that counties were forced to pick one of three: county executive, county administrator, or administrative coordinator. Of course, Winnebago County is an executive county, and if you look at the other 11 executive counties, they're primarily in southeast Wisconsin, and generally speaking, they're the more populous counties within the state. That's where we have county executives. County administrators, there are 33 of them. This is updated to include Grant, right, Sarah? So there's 33, I think? Maybe. 33 county administrators, and then the rest, 33 plus 12 is 45, from 72, 27 is county administrative coordinator. And administrative coordinator takes on a different form all over the state. You've got some people who are board chairs and administrative coordinators. We have clerks and administrative coordinators. We have administrative coordinator standalone positions. We have combination HR administrative coordinator. There's a variety of different administrative coordinator models. When we talk about what has occurred in the last 25 to 30 years in county government and look at the shift, it has been a pronounced shift away from the administrative coordinator model over to the administrator model. And I think that's a simple explanation for that, is because the business of county government has gotten increasingly complex. If you look at what county government did even 20 years ago, it does not resemble what county government does today, much less 40, 50, 60 years ago. And so I think there's been a need to bring on professional management and expertise as it relates to the operations within county government, all right? So that's why we've seen a lot of shift from administrative coordinator to administrator. You've also seen a bit of a shift from administrator to executive. That happened over in Portage County in 2002, I believe it was, right around there. They moved from administrator to county executive. Most recently in Washington County, they moved from administrator to county executive. So again, it's just you have to choose one of these three models, and then depending on your choice, that helps define in statute what the roles and responsibilities are for the executive, the administrator, and the board under each of the models. So the county executive position under 59.17, I just want to spend a moment here. If we look at the statutory responsibilities of the county executive, this model most closely resembles the model that we have for state government and the position of governor in state government. The county executive is elected statewide. The county executive appoints and supervises department heads subject to board confirmation. The county executive submits an annual budget to the board. The county executive has veto authority. The county executive's veto can be overridden by 2/3 vote of this board. And so when you look at it in form and function, the county executive serves serves county government much like the governor would serve state government. Question?
County executive isn't elected statewide.
Did I say statewide? Countywide.
Okay.
Yeah, let's put John up to a vote up in St. Croix County.
Watch out.
Countywide, elected at large. That's what I meant. I apologize. And so the county executive, again, functions like that. We had a question, Mr. Vice Chair, about the veto provision in 5917 sub 6 and the way that that veto process works. Was there a particular question about the way the veto process works?
Hang on, I took it off. The question primarily, let me get to it here, centers around the process.
Okay.
Once a resolution is approved by the county board, I'll give you my interpretation of that statute, and see if you can verify that, if you
Sure.
will. First of all, the county exec, I'm sorry. First of all, the county exec, as I read it, has 6 days to make a decision whether or not he's going to take an action, such as veto, partial veto, or not sign it at all.
Yes.
And that has to be noticed to the county board chairman, and they use the word journal, entered into a journal, whatever that means.
Right.
And the second thing is, if no action is taken, then at the next county board meeting, i.e. 30 days, without any action, it is automatically approved.
It
Am
has
I
to be
reading that
noticed for
correctly?
action. It has to be noticed for action. The county board can't simply say, we're not going to take it up. The statute's mandatory. If you read the statute, it says that the county board has to schedule it for a veto override or affirm the veto. That's my interpretation.
And if he chooses to take no action at all, not sign it, then that means.
Oh, I'm sorry, the executive not signing or the board?
Yes, the executive not
The
signing
executive
it.
not signing, okay.
Then that would mean after a 30-day period or the next county board meeting, it is approved.
I think it's after 6 days. I'll let your court counsel address it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And I know you have the statute, but just for clarification, it talks about if any resolution or ordinance is not returned by the county executive to the board at its first meeting occurring not less than 6 days, Sunday excepted, after it has been presented to the county executive, it shall become effective, okay? It shall become effective unless the board has recessed or adjourned for a period in excess of 60 days, in which case it shall not be effective without the county executive's approval. I mean, those are the words of the statute.
Yes, I'm reading the same way. I'm just looking for the lawyers to interpret my understanding of it, so.
And so essentially, the question is what happens if the executive does not sign?
Correct.
If the executive does not sign, that means the executive did not veto, and then it becomes law. If it's not returned to the board at its first meeting occurring not less than 6 days, Sundays accepted, and presented. So if there's no such thing as a pocket veto, I think is the terminology that we're accustomed to. And so if the executive does not veto and return that prior to the next board meeting, it becomes law.
Yeah, I agree.
Very good. Thank you for
You
that
bet.
clarification.
You
Want
bet.
to take some other questions right away, Mr. Phillips?
It's up to you, Mr. Chair. It's your meeting, so I'm happy to do that.
Supervisor Albrecht. Your lights. Okay, Supervisor Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for being here. I just want to clarify what Vice Chairman Fari said in the way that we're reading 5917 subsection 6. Because it's been reported in the newspaper, a local newspaper, that the county executive hasn't signed something. But the way that I'm reading the statute, and if you could please again clarify, he must return it with objection within 6 days to the county board chair. Is that correct?
Is it prior to the next board meeting, not sooner than 6 days, or when does he have to return it?
Not less than 6 days after it has been presented to the county executive,
Yeah, there's accepting Sundays.
accepting Sunday.
Yes, okay, yes. So it's 6 days, it has to be returned, and then at the next meeting, that's when you take it up.
Thank you for the clarification, because the local newspaper reported that it's just not being signed. But in case they're listening, it has to be returned with an objection.
Correct. Again, there's no concept of a pocket veto.
Supervisor Swan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney Phillips, thanks for your presentation tonight. I wonder if I might ask a sort of unrelated question. Just, we are tonight going to consider a resolution to amend 3.03 of the Winnebago County General Code regarding administration and management of tax deeded lands. Will you be sticking around after your presentation here, or are you heading out right away?
I think, I talked to your corporation counsel, I was going to stick around for that, assuming she's okay with me sticking
That's
around
good,
still.
because I'd like to pull it from the consent agenda and just have a few discussion points on
Sure.
that.
I'll
Okay,
be here.
thanks.
You bet.
Supervisor Burrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a clarification question for council.
Yes.
Pocket veto, this is the opposite, is it not? Pocket veto, the governor or president puts in his pocket, does nothing, essentially something doesn't
I thought a pocket veto was he sticks it in his pocket, that means it can't become law because he has to sign it. Perhaps I'm using the
So in this
terminology.
case, if he doesn't do anything,
It passes.
it's kind of like the opposite.
Right. It's the anti-pocket veto of the veto that's in the pocket. That's the way I like to refer to it. All right, good. And if anybody is taking notes, don't write that down. I don't want that thrown back at me that Andy Phillips said it's the anti-veto pocket of the pocket veto. All right. I want to talk briefly about the role of Corporation Counsel, which is, in my opinion, a very, very challenging feature within our statutes as it relates to Mary Ann's position here in the county. She is appointed by the county executive. She is supervised by the county executive. If the county executive is dissatisfied with her performance, the county executive can just flat out walk her out, right? No. We need this board to say, okay. I've seen this issue develop in other county executive counties over the years, where there has been a disconnect between the board and the county executive as to how the Corporation Counsel is performing. I've seen it go so far as to the board saying, we need to get our own lawyer. Mary Ann represents the interests of Winnebago County. She doesn't serve the interests of the county executive. She doesn't serve the interests of the county board. She serves the interests of Winnebago County. She has 2 masters. And when you have more than one master, how many masters do you have? None. It's challenging. She's in a very tough spot. And so you'll see in various discussions that I have with counties over the years and from time to time, is that we have an obligation as board members to understand staff's political neutrality. Not R&D, but constituent interests within county governments. And I think that's really important with Corporation Counsel. I get involved in situations in counties, frankly, a lot of times because Corporation Counsel is put in an impossible situation. No matter what position they take, they're going to frustrate one of the component units. And so I get called in to say, objectively, you don't represent executive or board, you don't answer to executive or board, you need to give us your opinion. And so I do that from time to time. So again, just understand there is a unique feature built into the statutes as it relates to the Corporation Counsel and Corporation Counsel's relationship with the executive and the board. As Mary Ann mentioned, county board supervisors serve a legislative function. That's in Chapter 59. One of my frustrations with Chapter 59 is that it's not organized very well. I wish in 1985 they would have done a better job reorganizing Chapter 59. If you look at the federal Constitution, you got Article 1, Article 2, Article 3 of that Constitution that defines the branches within the federal government. You look at the Wisconsin Constitution, you've got a definite delineation as it relates to the branches in state government. You look at Chapter 62 and 61 of the statutes, you've got a delineation of the branches within city and village government. We don't have a clear delineation of the branches within county government. That notwithstanding, I will tell you that going through Chapter 59, every indication and everything that you see in there says that the Board of Supervisors serves in a legislative capacity. The reason we say that is that there is no single statute, no single regulation, nothing that suggests a supervisor has any individual authority. All of the authority of an individual supervisor is exercised within the collective whole of the county board. And this county board serves in a legislative capacity. So I always say, why do we call them supervisors? They don't supervise a doggone thing. So again, thank you, legislature, for creating confusion with this name. If it was up to me, I'd go through the statutes and I'd white out. And for Reese's benefit, that's a bottle of white liquid that you can cross stuff out. I'd white out the word supervisor and write county board member. That's a more descriptive term, all right? Nonetheless, the historical term supervisor still exists. So I like to think of the county board as having 2 completely distinct roles, both of them equally important. Number 1, you exercise your policy-making authority through the adoption of resolutions, the adoption of ordinances, the transaction of business as a county board. That's number one. Number two, you appoint the agents necessary to carry out that policy direction. Now, it's not a clean appointment of those agents because you have a county executive. The county executive appoints department heads. But remember, this board has confirmation authority over those appointments. And so if you're not satisfied with the choice, you say, nice nomination, but we're not going to accept that particular person. You have that authority. And so your two roles are to adopt policy and to hold those agents charged with the responsibility of carrying out that policy accountable. All right? So think of it as a county board as you all being visionaries. And when's the last time anybody other than your spouse has called you a visionary in the last 6 months? All right? Why don't we aspire to be called visionaries? That's our job as a legislative body. Even our county board chair serves in a legislative capacity presiding over a legislative body. If you look at 5912 of the statutes, it looks a lot like what the Speaker of the Assembly would do at the state level, presiding over the legislative body. No operational authority, no special powers inure to the benefit of the board chair simply because of his or her election as the board chair. If we look at our standing committee functions, the committees serve in an assistant capacity to assist the board in its policymaking function. When we see really highly functioning county boards out there, highly functioning counties out there, we see a lot of policy development at the committee level. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that we ought to have confidence as a board that when a resolution comes to us from a committee that it is, quote, fully baked. Fully baked meaning that we've got input from the public, meaning that we've had a vigorous debate at the committee level, that we've fully vetted the proposal, that we've gotten a recommendation from staff, and that we know exactly why it is we're recommending what we're recommending. That way the board has confidence that the committee has done a lot of the heavy work in policy development and is making an informed recommendation back to the board. And so again, in counties that we see and consider to be highly functioning, we see a lot of work at the committee level.
We have another question for you, Mr. Phillips.
Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Hanson.
Actually, I think he's about to cover it. Could you
Okay.
reserve for me, please?
That makes me nervous because I don't know if I'm going to, but I'm going to try. All right. One issue that comes up often is I often get asked questions about public comment. You have public comment at your meeting here tonight. There is no legal requirement that you have public comment at your board meeting. You don't have to have it. You don't have to have it at a committee meeting. It's not required by law. If you do have it, there are certain rules, but you don't even have to have that on your agenda. But I think most boards throughout the state would agree that we want to hear from our constituents about what is going to impact them. What are we considering? What are we doing? What are we debating that is going to impact our constituents? Again, I respectfully suggest that there ought to be vigorous public comment at the committee level because that's where the policy development really occurs. By the time it gets to the county board, again, we ought to have confidence as a board that it has been fully vetted at the committee level. And so, again, respectfully, I would suggest that we do everything that we can to encourage public comment at these committee meetings. I'm not saying to eliminate public comment from county board meetings, but I think it's more impactful and of greater assistance to us as a board if we get that sort of input from the public at the committee level. Let's take a look at the role of administration, the role of your county executive, the role of department heads, the role of staff. They're not visionaries. We don't want them to be visionaries unless we tell them we want you to be visionary. They implement the policy that this board adopts. If you adopt an ordinance, does your county executive have a choice in enforcing that ordinance? No. If you if you adopt a budget, can the county executive exceed that budget? No. And so really we want people who are focused on the day-to-day operations in Winnebago County, who have a focus on the shorter term, who are not focused on the long-term strategic plan that's adopted, that are focused on the day-to-day operations within Winnebago County. understand that the people in administration are practicing a career. This is their profession. They've dedicated their lives and their education to doing what it is that they do. It requires attention to detail and specialized training. And so we, as a county board, ought to let them do their job, and they, as staff, ought to let us, as a board, do our job. So if our board has two roles, adopt policy and hold the agents charged with carrying out that policy accountable, what are staff's two roles? Well, number one, they have an obligation, not a choice, an obligation to carry out the policy established by the board. And then number two, they have an obligation to make you look good. They have to give you the information necessary to allow you as a board to make an informed policy decision. What that looks like depends upon what county you're in. A lot of that type of work and information exchange happens at the committee level in many counties. In other counties, we have boards that receive reports from department heads and so on when policy measures are introduced. It's up to you as to what works best. Again, respectfully, I think it works best at the committee level, but it's up to you to decide what process works best. Again, staff's job is to implement policy, but then to also provide you with the information necessary to allow you to make an informed policy decision. And this really bears out when we look at the qualifications necessary for these two roles, board member versus staff. When we think about, let's just take, for example, you're going to hire a new highway commissioner. Let's imagine the county executive is going to take out a help wanted ad in the Oshkosh Northwestern for a new highway commissioner. That help wanted ad is going to say things like, we want somebody who's graduated from college. We want somebody who's got at least 5 years experience working with county highway systems or state highway systems. We want somebody who's an engineer. We want somebody who is a member of these various organizations. We want somebody who is professionally accredited in some area. In other words, we want the best and the brightest in Winnebago County in charge of our county highway department. All right, let's think about now for a moment that same help wanted ad in the Oshkosh Northwestern for county board supervisor. What are the qualifications? What do you have to have? What are the qualifications to be county board supervisor? You have to what? You have to have a pulse. Yes, that's true. You have to be living. How old do you have to be? 18. Where do you have to live? In your district. No felony. That's right. What else? Anything? It's a pretty impressive set of qualifications, isn't it? You know what? And a lot of people say, well, wait a second. I'm super talented. I've got a background in small business that contributes to this board, and the fact that you're saying that doesn't matter is insulting. And I say, wait. I didn't say that didn't matter. All I said is that that's not a qualification for you to hold office. Because to me, the most important qualification for you to sit in your seats is the fact that you got at least one more vote than the person running against you. That means a majority of the people in your district felt comfortable saying, this person is going to represent my interests on this county board. I don't care if you're a pastor, a farmer, a homemaker, a lawyer, a doctor. It doesn't matter. The most important qualification is that you got one more vote and the people have confidence that you are going to represent them in this seat. And I think if we look at these qualifications, that speaks to the roles and responsibilities in county government. You are the policymakers. You're adopting the policy direction for the county on behalf of the citizens that elected you. The staff, we want to be the best and the brightest to carry out that policy direction. All right? That highlights the distinction in the roles. So again, when we talk about leadership, department heads have leadership roles within their departments, but they don't have overall leadership roles within the county. I put this up here because I love this paragraph from a court decision. There have only been a couple of court decisions that have talked about the distinction between the executive or administrative branch in county government and the legislative branch, the county board within county government. This is one of them. It's a 1996 case, Schutte versus Vandehay, Outagamie County. And if we look at the decision, it cites a couple of things that I think are really illustrative of what we're talking about here with the distinction between policy and administration. I'm not going to read this to you. You can read it yourselves. You can have this PowerPoint when we're all done here. But the important part is that the court looked at Attorney General opinions, the court looked at the dictionary, the court looked at the leading treatise on municipal corporations in the entire country, and all of this is contained within those sources and distilled into one paragraph that I think does a great job of distinguishing between policy and administration in county government. The last quote is the best. The crucial test for determining what's legislative and what's administrative has been said to be whether the ordinance or policy is one making a new law or policy or one executing a law or policy already in existence. All right, so has anybody heard of the Schutte versus Vandehey case? So, no, you don't get to talk. You're in the back. So I'm going to repeat it. So we had a county executive in Outagamie County who was taking a look at the code of ordinances. And one of the ordinances says we're going to lease the land around our airport for agricultural purposes. County board said that's what we ought to do, is promote agriculture in the county. That land is available for agricultural use. We're going to lease that land around the airport for ag use. County executive said that doesn't feel good. I know it's not against FAA regulation. I know it's not against state regulation, but it doesn't feel safe to me to have a plot of land attracting wildlife to the area when we're asking planes to fly in and fly out. So you know what? I'm not going to lease that land around the airport. County board said, well, you can't do that. The ordinance is on the books. County executive said, the heck I can't. I'm in charge of administering these ordinances, and I say I'm not going to administer this ordinance. So they sued each other. It went to court. So who do you think won? Who had the authority to determine whether that land around the airport is going to be leased? How many people think that the county board had that power? How many people think the executive had that power? All right, the county board had the power. The county board won this lawsuit, in no small part because of the incredible team of lawyers that the county board had. County board won this lawsuit. So they have the right to determine whether that land around the airport is going to be leased for agricultural purposes. Here's the kicker. Who negotiates the lease? The executive. This is an example, in my mind, of what we see throughout Chapter 59 and other statutes that relate to county government, a baked-in conflict. It's conflict that is not resolved in statute. And I, for one, don't mind that conflict. It's not because I like to see disputes. It's not because I like to be hired to resolve disputes. It's because I like to see people getting together to talk through these issues to, again, get things done. Because do you think the people in Outagamie County cared who made the decision of whether that land was going to be leased? No, they really don't care. They just wanted, again, the efficient and effective delivery of services to the residents that rely on those services. And so if we look at the conflict and understand that it doesn't always have a clear answer within the statutes in terms of resolving that conflict, let's have a discussion about how we move forward together. I pulled some language from an Attorney General opinion as well that deals with the distinction between policy and administration. Again, I'm not going to read it to you, but there are, I think, if we look at Chapter 59 without the clear delineation, there might be confusion. And I put this stuff up here about the court case and the Attorney General opinion so people don't think that I'm just making this up. I'm not making this up. It's there. It's just not readily apparent. It's been recognized. So, further illustration of distinction between policy and administration. Think about the 5 questions. If we think about the role of policymakers, they answer the what and the why questions. If we think about the role of administration and operations, your county executive, they answer the where, when, and how questions. What do I mean by that? Let's imagine that a resolution is introduced before the county board to create a hiking trail system through Winnebago County. The what question? Is the county going to establish a hiking trail system? Why? Is this system going to benefit the county and the taxpayers and the citizens and residents of Winnebago County? Those are the important policy decisions that this board makes. Once that policy decision is made, you hand that decision off to administration to implement. They answer who's going to build and maintain the system. What's the time frame for implementation? Where will the system need to be maintained? So that policy decision is handed off to administration to implement. All right? But I know that the moment that resolution is introduced at the county board, what's the first question out of somebody's mouth? Who's going to pay for it? How much is it going to cost? How long is this going to take? And so then you say, well, wait a second, you just told me we don't get into those questions. We just say we want a hiking trail system, and then we tell Mr. Damo, go build it. Well, think about the two roles that staff has. Number one is to implement the policy decision. Number two is to give you the information necessary to make an informed policy decision. All right, so the administration, the executive and staff are going to give you all of the information necessary to answer the what and the why questions, and then once that's answered, you take that decision, you hand it off to the executive and say, implement. All right? I like this example. I've used this one before too. What can we learn from the Green Bay Packers here, other than the fact that we have a really good football team? All right? Who hires the players? Who puts the players on the field? It's your general manager. Who calls the plays? No, who calls the plays on the field? The coach, head coach, LaFleur. Who has the authority to call an audible? It's not T.J. Rubley. The quarterback. If the play comes in from the sidelines, does the offensive lineman have the ability to say, that's a dumb play, I'm not going to run it. I'm not going to do that. What happens to that player? Gone. All right? So we think of it in football terms with that policy decision coming in from the head coach gets handed off to the players who have been selected by the GM, and those players have an obligation to carry out the play that is established by the head coach. And then Jordan Love, the quarterback, has the ability to call an audible with the permission of the head coach. If the head coach doesn't give Jordan Love the permission to call an audible, what happens? He's T.J. Rubley. Do you guys remember T.J. Rubley, the infamous audible in Minnesota? He was out of a job the next day because he audibled out of a play. And so if the play doesn't work, the head coach evaluates and makes a determination on the next play. And so we think about it from a policy perspective, and we say we adopt our policy, we hand it off to administration to implement. Administration implements, and the play didn't work either because administration didn't do their job or because the play was just a bad call. So we're going to modify it. We're either going to hold administration accountable or we're going to call a new play. So that's another good parallel. So what happens if we get engaged in these lengthy debates about whose responsibility it is to make what decision and when? In other words, we don't have a firm understanding of roles and responsibilities. We have a blurred distinction between the policymaking branch in county government and the executive branch. We spend a lot of time on trivial matters. We read and read and read documents to get up to speed to make these decisions that frankly ought to be left to staff. And there's a full list here. I don't know how many apply to Winnebago County. In some counties, all of these apply to Winnebago County, or not Winnebago. In some counties, all of these apply to their meetings. I don't know if this always happens in Winnebago County, but the most important one to me is the one I haven't read here. We become reactive instead of proactive. We're going to solve problems when they're presented to us at a board meeting. We're going to solve the problem, then go on to the next problem, wait for the next board meeting, and solve a whole bunch of problems again. That's reactive. Are visionaries reactive or proactive? They're proactive. All right, and so we ought to try to focus our efforts as a legislative body on what we can do to be proactive in solving these concerns and issues. Now, here's a Wisconsin County organizational chart. It's greatly simplified. But if we talk about it in terms of roles and responsibilities, we've got a county executive, county board committees, department heads, county staff. First and foremost, you'll note that the county executive in this organizational chart has a reporting relationship with the county board. It's not an employment relationship. It's not a supervisory relationship because that big orange arrow on the right means county executive is elected by the people of the county, not the state, the county. And so the county executive answers to the people, but also the county executive takes policy direction from this board. The county executive submits a budget, but it's not the county executive's budget, it's the county's budget. And it's not the county's budget until the county board takes a vote to adopt that budget. The county executive appoints and supervises department heads. Department heads supervise staff. And the reporting relationship there goes from staff to department head to county executive and back down. All right? There are no arrows that go from department head or staff up to the committees or up to the county board. Does that mean that we don't have interaction with staff or department heads? No, not at all. Because remember, they have an obligation to give you the information necessary to make an informed policy decision, but we're going to have that interaction after discussion with the county executive about what's the best way to get information from staff to this board. Otherwise, it's chaotic. Otherwise, staff don't know who they report to. Otherwise, department heads don't know who their boss is. So we're going to have a conversation with our county executive about that reporting relationship and how do we get information back to our committees and back to our board to make informed policy decisions. And then, as if things weren't difficult enough in Chapter 59, we have these things called constitutional officers in county government. That's nothing like what they have at state government. Our city and village counterparts don't have anything like this. We have constitutional officers. We have a sheriff, register of deeds, treasurer, clerk, clerk of circuit court. Who did I miss? That's about it. And so if you look at the constitutional officers, let's start with the question, why do they exist? Why do we have independently elected people in the county that somehow fit within our organizational chart but are elected by the people of the county as a whole, as opposed to being appointed by the board or the county executive? Why do they exist? Historically, think about the function of the office of sheriff. The sheriff was set up to enforce state law. Register of deeds, established to record state land records. County clerk, keep an official record of the proceedings within a particular county, which was a geographical presence of the state. Treasurer was established to hold state money. And so the state wanted to provide those constitutional officers with independence from county government to ensure that those constitutional officers were carrying out their state function, again, independent of what the county board thought. But it leads to problems. It leads to problems because the constitutional officers are answerable to the general public at the ballot box, but also we ask them to serve like any other department head within county government. They have staff, they have a budget, they have priorities, and so we ask them to fit within our organizational chart, kind of. And the concern that I see arise, again, not necessarily in Winnebago County, but in other counties, is that I see county boards and constitutional officers fighting over things like money, personnel, function, and things like that. The discussion about the role of constitutional officers is a separate discussion. I've put a lot out there on that discussion. If you go to wicounties.org, there are old webinars dealing with the role of constitutional officers. But let me boil it down to this. There are certain responsibilities of our constitutional officers that the county board has zero authority over. You can't take it away, you can't supplement, you can't do anything with it. Those are their responsibilities, all right? We have an obligation as a county board to fund their office to a level necessary for them to carry out those statutory functions. But when it comes to staff, when it comes to finance, the county board controls. The county board controls the personnel in their office, the county board controls the purse strings. So remember when I talked before about conflict that's baked into the statutes? This is another example. We have conflict baked into the statutes. And so I would encourage you all to have frequent conversations with your constitutional officers, your county executive, and others to determine what level of funding and support is necessary to carry out their functions. Trust me, that will lead to a much easier budget process. All right, so we have the aspiration that we want to work together. All right, that's our goal, that's our aspiration. The first fundamental part of that is to know our job and not interfere with the other side. And this goes both ways. Administration does not interfere with the board's responsibility. The board doesn't interfere with administration's responsibility. That's the roles and responsibility discussion. I'm giving you a preview of this tonight, but I hope it's a discussion that continues within Winnebago County. We're going to devote the time necessary to do a good job, no matter whether we're staff or we're county board member. We're going to be prepared. We're going to read background materials. This third bullet point is a really important point. I started this conversation by saying that this is not training, this is not education, because I've never sat in your seat. I cannot imagine how intimidating it is at your very first county board meeting to sit in that seat and be presented with a resolution to amend the human services budget to increase certain line item by $400,000 because of an out-of-county placement. My head would be spinning. How in the world can I make a $400,000 decision my first night on the job? That's impossible. So it's okay to admit that we don't know something. Because again, The role of staff is to make it look good, to give you the information necessary to make an informed policy decision. So it's okay to admit what you don't know. And when we admit what we don't know, we're not going to jump to conclusions. We're going to listen to all of the debate. We're going to listen to what staff has to say, and then we're going to make an informed decision. Don't become a complaint vehicle or process. Don't become an ear for employee or citizen complaints that you are going to take on to resolve, because that's not your job as a board. What I like to say, and this is going to date me, is that county board members ought to have an awesome Rolodex right by their phone. That Rolodex is going to contain the contact information so that if anybody calls with a problem, you have the ability to connect that person with whomever can solve that problem immediately, all right? If you don't know what that process is, if you don't know where those complaints ought to be directed, you have to call Mr. Damo. He knows. He's in charge of county operations. He knows who can resolve those complaints that come in. So again, don't become a complaint center. I say this not because I'm lecturing. I'm saying this trying to make your lives easier, because I've seen plenty of people crawl down that rabbit hole of trying to solve complaints. They spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week solving complaints and never focusing on the long-term vision established for the county board. So key points to remember. As counties, we're creatures of the state. We can only do what the statutes and the Constitution allow us to do. We serve, on the county board, we serve as a legislative body. We cooperatively make decisions. We approve budgets. We approve resolutions. We want to have a strong committee system where we can have confidence that when a legislative matter is brought to this board, that it has been fully vetted at the committee level. We want our committees to do a lot of that preliminary work before it gets to the board. As individual county board members or supervisors, we don't have singular operational control. We act as a member, a constituent unit of this legislative body. Administration and department heads, they implement policies and procedures of the board. Micromanaging stifles productivity. I don't care if we're talking about a management relationship. I don't care if we're talking about a relationship between a county board and county staff. Micromanaging in any respect, it stifles productivity. But I also want to tell you that there is not universal recognition or understanding of what the term micromanagement means. Because for some people, they think that holding them accountable is micromanagement. I'm sorry, that's not true, all right? So if you have a concern or an issue about micromanagement, if your county executive is getting complaints from employees about members of the board micromanaging, have a discussion to find out the problem, find out if there is indeed micromanagement, and then have a discussion about roles and responsibilities and what you can do to solve that. Because, again, micromanagement stifles productivity and can be a real hamper to getting the important work done that we need done. So if we work together, cohesively, we can be very, very successful. Not to say you're not already, but I think that if we look at a fully functioning and effective county government, you've got a board and you've got a county executive or administrator and team working in unity together for a common purpose and a common goal. So let me pause there and see if I've missed anything, if there's any questions I can answer, and so on. I'll let the chair recognize folks.
Supervisor Hanson, did you get your answered?
Thank you for clarifying that 59 is complex. Please, I'm trying to figure out a way, given this new information, to ask this question without looking completely foolish. When I listened to some of the engagement of our committee chairs, I am sometimes, there's a disconnect that absolutely needs to be healed. When you're looking and squaring at 59.17 with 59.51, the board powers, please help me understand, especially given the organizational chart that you presented. The committee chairs have the ability to set the agenda, yet there seems to be a conflict with the executive branch saying we're holding something up. I guess what my real question is, if 59.17 gives such ability to the county executive, then for the most part, what are the committee chairs even doing? Sometimes, what are we even doing here as a board every month instead of just meeting quarterly with the exception of the budget session?
That's a great question, and I will be the first to tell you that Chapter 59 uses terminology that is confusing, that's ambiguous, and that leads to the type of questions that you have. If you look at 5951 sub 1, it talks about the board exercising organizational power in setting policy for the county. If you look at 5917, it talks about the county executive exercising organizational and administrative power over the departments within county government. And I bet if we went around the room, we would have 30 different definitions of policy versus organizational administrative power versus the role of the committee versus the role of the executive. So it's less than clear in the statutes. But if you distill it down to its basic minimum, if you will, the committees establish policy recommendations for this board. This board acts to adopt resolutions and ordinances and provide that policy direction. The committee, as an oversight for a particular function within county government, so to speak, takes a look at budgetary impact of various policy measures, takes a look at reports from staff and from your county executive as to budgetary performance and operational performance, is going to look to your county executive and staff for recommendations on how to improve budgetary performance and operational performance. And then if the county executive says, you know what, we'd be well served in Winnebago County to have an employee handbook. We don't have one right now, but we'd be well served to have one. Then you say to the executive, give me an example of what you want to see in your employee handbook. Then the committee takes up the handbook and eventually takes it back to this board for adoption. And so it's not perfectly clear, but when we think about administrative and organizational role of county executive, of course the executive is going to adopt policy out to all department heads to implement the direction that this board establishes as the overall policy for the county. Does that mean that the county executive is a policymaker? Not in the highest level sense. This board is the policymaker in Winnebago County. But your executive is going to have internal policy to implement what is this board's desire in terms of resolution, ordinance, budget, and so on. And so I know that's not the clarity that we want. I know it's not the perfection we desire in defining exactly what happens, but I think it's worthy of a conversation with your county executive to say, here's what our committee meeting agendas look like. Here's the information that would be helpful to us as a committee. What is it that we can provide you in terms of additional insight, guidance, and support to allow you as the county executive to carry out the policy direction that the board establishes? I think that's worthy of a conversation. And I think your executive would hopefully agree with me.
Supervisor Hulber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this was a beautiful presentation. I really wish you could have had it back in April when I was my first day here. This would have been a lot of help. My question pertains to your slide, what happens without distinction between policy and administration. A couple of us have noticed issues that I won't get into specifics, but sometimes things come up and we just have questions. So I love the presentation, but this seems to be in a perfect world, in a theoretical environment where there isn't prejudice and personal agendas and corruption. How does your presentation account for that? Because from what I'm understanding, the distinction between policy and administration is trust what they give us, and sometimes information has been missing, misleading, or just flat out wrong.
You're not suggesting there's politics in county government, are you? Because that doesn't exist.
I'm just asking, how do we, without...
I've been accused of living in utopia. There's no doubt about it. And I think that it's in the eye of the beholder to an extent as well, because we're human beings, and so we have personal relationships with folks, and there are certain folks we get along with better than other folks, and so we have a natural tendency to trust what the people we get along with are telling us versus the people that we don't get along. I get all of that. I understand that. And so to the extent possible, what I always like to say is that the process is important, and I don't want to overregulate things, but process is important where we say, look, here's the format that we want to see for resolutions. We want a fiscal note, we want a legal note, we want this, we want that. We want that information contained within the resolution so that we know exactly what the impact's going to be when we vote on it. I'm using this as an example. If we want a report from a department head, here's the format of the report that we want. We want to understand what this proposal does. We want to understand who's been consulted. We want to understand budgetary impact. We want to understand operational impact in terms of headcount. In other words, you have that discussion about the information that you want to see. There's nothing that I can do or anybody else can do to give you trust in somebody you don't trust. Nothing we can do about that. All we can do, though, is dictate the form of the information provided, so at least we have confidence that nothing's being hidden or neglected or so on. Again, have a conversation with your county executive about that, because I'm sure that from a staff perspective, I'd rather know what's important to you so that I can give you meaningful input as opposed to guessing at what might be important and then showing up at this podium not knowing what questions are going to be thrown at me on the board floor. So I think it's worthy of a discussion about what you want to see in terms of that type of a report and information.
Supervisor Swan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, could I reserve my question to the end of the list, if there's anyone else?
There's no one else.
No one else,
right now.
okay.
There is one more, but go ahead.
All right, well, this is a two-part question, since you're up here. And you did mention items that are not clear in the statute. The first question is, since T.J. Ripley was demoted on the Vikings, we had a certain quite famous quarterback who left us a few years back that used to call a lot of audibles.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, did he call one too many audibles, or what happened there?
I can't remember his name. I think I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name. His team isn't doing so hot right now either, as I recall.
Yeah.
I think he might have called too many audibles. And I think honestly, that's a good example, though, because I like to say you're finally seeing Matt LaFleur's offense and what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Aaron Rodgers' offense. And I think eventually the Packers just said, it's best we part ways.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. I did have one other question. Since you did mention not clearing the statute, I'm just going to jump over to my question just as a heads up before we get into our resolution tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Since, we've written an ordinance here on acquisition of tax deeded properties, and that's under the umbrella of Chapter 75.
Mm-hmm.
So, we do things, have language in this ordinance that talks about ordering appraisals, certified appraisals.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there's other issues that may come up, such as relocation expenses for someone who lost their property. I guess my question is, if we're as a county complying with Chapter 75, and are we also not required to comply with Chapter 32, eminent domain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are. And on top of that, you're required to comply with the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, which talks about takings.
Right, because
it's all baked in there, yeah.
Because Tyler versus Sangamon County specifically mentions taking.
Yep.
So a tax deeded property acquisition then is a taking.
It is.
And an eminent domain acquisition under condemnation is a taking.
It is.
So if we're writing an appraisal, does not the appraisal language have to comply with the appraisal written for a tax deeded property need to comply with Chapter 32?
No.
Especially in terms of language,
I'll get
definitions.
Why don't we save that? Let's save that discussion because that's a very important point.
Yeah.
This concept of appraisal, because it's certified appraisal or a committee of the county board or treasurer that can make that determination. So, and I'll tell you why when we get there.
But if we do get an appraisal, shouldn't that appraisal comply with Chapter 32?
The law doesn't require it, no. It's a different set of circumstances in terms of that takings analysis.
But if you have a condemnation, you need to comply with Chapter 32 and you're writing an appraisal.
No, I understand that, but
So
it's
that's
a
not
different
clear
set of
in
circumstances.
to me, that's not clear in the statute what we need to do
It's a
here.
different type of appraisal for a different type of purpose. And you can look at it from a constitutional standpoint. The point being is that fair market value. Well, fair market value can be determined in any number of ways. The best indicator of fair market value is an arm's length sale.
Right.
And so if we have an arm's length sale, we don't have to worry about an appraisal.
But, under a bid process, I would agree with you for residential property, but our ordinance actually states that we really, only on discretion of the treasurer will we get we get an appraisal for a commercial property. But in many cases, it's more difficult to determine market value for commercial property than residential property, and you don't have an open bidding process necessarily. It's going to get you to the right number. Our ordinance requires that we not accept anything below the floor of an appraisal. Does that only mean one appraisal or more than one? Should we get more than one?
And that's up to this board as to
Yeah,
what you
well-
want to do in terms of getting to that comfort
Okay.
level of saying we're at fair market value, because that's all we're talking about is the comfort level.
Right.
Again, if somebody were to sue you and say, look, your appraisal's a sham, it said my property's worth $10, it's really worth 10 million, you're gonna
Right.
have a problem.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of gray area between $10 and 10 million.
Okay.
And so it's the comfort level of this board in establishing that fair market value.
Right.
Because if you mess up, it's a constitutional issue.
Okay, I'm not sure I totally agree with you on that, you know, that tax deeded appraisal is different from eminent domain appraisal, but I'll reserve that for a future
Well,
conversation.
one is the person is staying in their property and we're taking a portion of their land. If we're taking their entire property, it might
Right.
be equivalent. The other way, it's a different appraisal.
But it's not necessarily a portion of the land, it could be a total taking.
It could be a total take, that's
So,
right.
You're
you
gonna
know,
talk on that later?
I will.
Because I think
Okay,
he, I
all
think
right,
he
that's
wrote part
fine.
of that. Thank
I'll
you.
reserve any.
I think
any more
everybody
for
else is still awake after talking about Tyler v. Henneman County and 75 and 32, right?
Supervisor
'Cause
Powers.
usually I do a good job with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you listed the constitutional officers, I would have thought that the coroner would be on there, on that list as
It
well.
is. Not every county has a coroner. You have the option of going from coroner to medical examiner as a system. The majority of counties now have medical examiners as opposed to elected coroners.
Because
but a
if I
coroner-
decide to, if either I move out of my district or I decide to resign for some reason, I resign to the sheriff. If we're going to arrest the sheriff, it's the coroner who can arrest him, right? Mm-hmm. So I would have thought that that coroner would be on the constitutional officers list.
They are. The reason, again, surveyor is a constitutional officer as well. There aren't many counties that have a county surveyor anymore either. So that's, it's just, it is one of those where, because it wasn't applicable to every county, I didn't put it on the
Okay,
list.
all right.
Supervisor Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Andy, for the presentation. I do have two questions. One would be, so who invited you to come speak to the board tonight?
It was, I think it was a combination of folks, your chair, your corporation counsel executive, and somebody that I live with might have mentioned something too.
Okay, perfect. And then my second question is, let's just say you're putting on your legislator hat, you're down in Madison, Chapter 59 is pretty gray. What would be the one area that you would try to address with legislation if you could?
Well, that's a really good question. I haven't really thought about it there because we tend to have priorities at the Counties Association for looking at Chapter 59. Right now, I know that one of the priorities this next session is to address the whole sheriff issue with the coroner, because we have a lot of counties that don't have coroners, and so we want to create a clear line of succession, given the importance of the office of sheriff. But I think what I do is probably take a look at reorganizing the entirety of Chapter 59, delineating who a county officer is and what that means, delineating the role of the county board, and delineating the role of the executive administrator or administrative coordinator.
Supervisor Schellinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. So I'll follow the Packers story with an example. I'd be curious your take. So say the Winnebago County Board in its vast wisdom decides that one of the great plagues of our county is that people have trouble getting to Lambeau Field on a Sunday, and so the county decides to allocate money in the budget to hire a director of Packer transportation operations. The executive decides, you know what, it's not really a big deal, I'm a Vikings fan, and doesn't want to hire that position. Kind of like the Outagamie County case where, you know, ultimately the executive had authority to negotiate a contract and could have said, well, I don't know how their ordinances were written in, but, you know, maybe could have slow rolled it or put outrageous prices out there. If a board creates position authority and allocates money, and the executive or the administration doesn't want to hire that position, they have all the authority in the world to just do that, right?
Technically, yeah. And I mean, I told you there were two cases that are out there. The one is the Outagamie County case. The other one is the Milwaukee County case. And I never like to use that example because Milwaukee County is frankly messed up and they have special rules. And that was the Lipscomb versus Abley case. And that came down to control over personnel in large part. interpretation of Milwaukee ordinances controlling wage scales, controlling hiring practices, controlling other things. And it was a complicated mess to try to figure that out. To me, there's nothing statewide beneficial about that decision, but it did illustrate what you're pointing out, is that there is conflict between executive, whose job it is to carry out the policy direction that the board establishes, and board prerogative to establish that policy. And it's a conflict. It is. And your recourse, if your executive is not performing, you're completely unhappy with your executive, can you fire your executive? No. Who controls that relationship? The governor. The electors can recall, but the governor can remove the county executive for cause. All right? And so it sets up a situation where you've got co-equal branches in Winnebago County with executive and legislative, and you got to figure out a way to work together. The state is a great example. I think that our legislature gets along great with our governor. We see that day in and day out, right? You can laugh.
know
That
better
was
than me.
intended to be a joke.
Then I have one other question. So you talked about, the board's ability to create accountability. I think that's one of the things that I've struggled with seeing how that plays out in, real concrete terms. And so I would like you to maybe offer some more language about how you see county boards' ability to exert accountability, and maybe also within that talk about the remedy or accountability that a county board can create when budgets are exceeded. I've seen here in Winnebago County where budgets have been exceeded and there is no remedy. It doesn't matter if a department exceeds their expenditures. It just doesn't matter as far as I've been able to see. So yeah, curious your thoughts on those things.
Yeah, and I'll go back to what I said about process being important. And so I think from an accountability standpoint, you want to see reports, you want to see something coming back to you that shows you budgetary performance, operational performance, if you've established strategic goals, for example, for a particular aspect of operation, and you speak with the county executive about implementation of that strategic direction, and you want to see how we're doing, you have a report or something that comes back to you to give you the information necessary. If somebody is underperforming, if we have a particular department that's underperforming, a department head or so on, it's a conversation with the county executive. That department head serves at the pleasure of the county executive. The board doesn't control that relationship. And so again, it's conflict baked into the statutes, forcing you to have a conversation with the county executive about what to do next. That's the best I can offer. It is. It's conflict baked in the statute, forcing you to work with your county executive on resolution of that particular issue.
I would agree that that's what the statute set up, but I also would disagree that there's any real accountability that's vested in the board if the process is to go to the co-equal branch and compel them by the goodness of their heart, I guess, to act differently.
Well, again, this board retains budgetary authority. This board retains authority on policy direction and things like that. So you can impact operations within county government through adoption of policy. You can do that. So is it strict?
There's also not really an authority of the county board to ensure that those policy decisions are enacted. We've talked about a number of cases, and I think in fact would be hard pressed to find any case where the executive or other constitutional officer couldn't just say, I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a problem. And then next time they ask for money, what are you going to say?
Well, and that's to my other question, is that I don't think there is any real impact to the budget decisions that the county board sets out. If a department exceeds its budget, and we've all seen that here, that a department has exceeded its labor budget, its operating expenses, and there isn't any accountability to that. I've seen departments that have exceeded their labor budget. They don't have to they haven't come to get budget transfers or things like that to clear it up. It might be a mark in the CAFR 9 months later, but nobody reads that, and it's not something that stops. There's no stop payment once you've hit and, you know, the allocated amount of money. So I don't really buy that as a real mechanism. I mean, you know, if this board said, you know what, the public health department, just making this up, exceeded its, you know, its budget, so next year we're going to allocate $0, that's not going to actually stop the public health department from existing. They'll just spend money, and I don't know what our remedy is. So I guess I would,
I would say if you allocate 0, they can't spend the money without some sort of budgetary action by the board. Again, I don't know specifics of what happens in Winnebago County, but I will tell you that there's a statute that says if somebody goes over budget and they need more money, they have to come back to the board and get an amendment. Or the finance committee if you've got delegated authority to the finance committee.
Your time is used up.
okay, thank you.
Supervisor Bender.
My question is kind of on the same topic. Like, we approved $1 million to build 6 tiny houses. Well, they only could get 3 for that. So rather than bringing it back to us and seeing if we wanted to basically build 3 tiny houses for $1 million, they just built them. You know, so it's like if I tell you I'm going to sell you 6 houses for $1 million, and then your wife approves the money, and I say, hey, I can only give you 3 now. You know, we were misled. And that happens more, you know, we approved money to buy a cat paver for $725,000. They didn't buy a cat paver. They gave us the literature on a cat paver, but when we gave them the money, then they buy what they want. You know, there must be some way that we can tie that money to what they're actually presenting to us, because it's like if you're going to tell me you're going to buy a Cadillac, and then when you buy an Impala, well, the Cadillac was a good deal. The Impala was way overpriced. You know, how do we guarantee that we get what we pay for?
That's a good question. I mean, yeah, and I can't speak to specific examples. All I'll say is this, is that did you appropriate money to buy a car, or did you appropriate money to buy a Cadillac? Did you appropriate money to buy a green Cadillac? Did you appropriate money to buy a green Cadillac with leather seats? In other words, you get down to those specifics, and that's what you've got. And I can't speak to any specifics here within the county, but again, I think that's a conversation with your county executive. Say, I feel like we were misled on this. We were told this. Have that conversation, and then if you need to be more specific in the appropriation, be more specific.
Yeah, I mean, like, when they bring you the literature on a cat paver, you would just assume that's what you're going to get, right? I mean, that's pretty specific, there was a cat paver and an Etner chip spreader, and we didn't get a cat paver, we got some, I never heard of the name paver we got, you know, so it's like it's misleading to me.
Sure.
And it was cheaper, you know, they saved money, but when I got that literature, I researched that paver, I called a couple other counties that had that paver, and they had really good luck with it. So I thought we were getting a good piece of equipment, and I was all in. Well, then we didn't get that piece of equipment, so I felt like it was a bait and switch, and somehow, you know, I don't know how we get away from that, but if you show me a picture of what you're going to buy and we approve the money, I assume that's what we should be getting.
I can't comment on exactly that situation, but I think that's worthy of a discussion, and say I feel like we were misled, absolutely.
And what we're told is we appropriate the money, they decide how to spend it.
Well, that's true, as long as they spend it on the appropriation classification that's consistent with what you've established. I mean,
so in other words, what we really have to do is we appropriate the money for a CAT 725 paver.
you have to,
So
you can
that the
establish.
money's not appropriated for nothing but that piece of equipment.
I'm not going to say if that's a good, bad, or indifferent idea, because ultimately it may hamstring or handcuff administration to the point where they forego a good deal because you were so specific that they were forced to spend an extra $50,000 on something that wasn't needed. So again, I think it's a discussion with your executive and your administrative team about what are our expectations here? What is it that we're after? We want really good machinery at a really good price. That's all that matters. Really good machinery at a really good price. How do we ensure that? Do we have a purchasing policy where we say you have to go out and solicit bids? Do we have a policy that says if any expenditure is going to exceed this budget by this amount, you have to come back to us? I don't know what that looks like, but that's a conversation that you ought to have, because you can establish procurement policy, but I've also seen procurement policies that are so incredibly complex that they run counter-purpose to the intention of that policy itself. So you just got to be careful with that.
Right, well, I don't like the tiny houses, or the 980 housing. I don't think any of us would approve $1 million for 3 tiny, or 980 houses.
I'd rather not approve anything for any of that housing.
Right, but I mean, we have to have it, but we were under the impression we were getting 6. And when they couldn't get 6, maybe they should have brought it back to us. But they don't. Once we approve the money, they spend it how they want. And that's the way the system works, I guess. But somehow we have to be able to be more answer to the taxpayers. The taxpayers, when you look at them little, about 540 square foot houses for $300,000 apiece, that they would think that we didn't do a very good job of watching after their tax dollars. And I would agree with them. I'm embarrassed when I look at those, and that's what we got.
I understand.
Supervisor Halber, second time.
Yeah, thank you. Just on the same discussion, can you give an example of exactly how we prevent ourselves from getting into these situations rather than using a specific example to go back and comment on what we should have done? Can you tell us how to prevent that and what it would look like to hold someone accountable if that doesn't happen properly?
Well, again, that's getting back to, like, the employee handbook that contain regulations of employment governing the relationship between the county and its employees. It's a purchasing policy that says if we have appropriated money to make a specific purpose or purchase, we have an expectation that you're going to get competitive bids and that you're going to consider these factors in making that purchase. In other words, you have a policy on the books that establishes the parameters under which that particular official exercises discretion in making the determination. If you just say, buy whatever you want, they're going to buy whatever they want. We can't complain about it. But if we have a policy on the books that says you have to follow these steps, again, process-driven, if we have a process for this, they have to follow that process.
Okay, that's the first half of the question. What about once we've established a policy to dictate how a process goes and how a purchase is supposed to follow the process, what happens when it just simply does not happen that way?
Yeah, and the county board doesn't really have the authority to fire somebody. The employment relationship is controlled through the executive's office. And so again, I think it's working with the executive and HR to say our expectation is people follow these policies. And if somebody doesn't follow these policies, there have to be repercussions.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be argumentative. You're telling me what we can do. I'm asking you what we can do.
Yeah, and I'm saying there's
You're
not a lot you can do just
have a
as this board, because
conversation?
you are not sitting in an operational function. You're
Sure.
sitting in a legislative capacity. So you don't have authority or control over the operations. You have authority and control over the budget, the legislation, the policies, and things like that.
So again, going back to what Supervisor Schellinger said, it's misleading to say that the county board has any way to hold anyone accountable when there is nothing we can do but have a conversation.
Well, it depends on your definition of accountability. It's the same thing at Congress, at the federal level, the Assembly and Senate at the state level. They don't control the employment relationship either, but they can pull people in to provide reports, provide testimony, and so on, to force them to conform. No, you don't have the authority to say you're fired. You don't have that authority.
Right.
But are there other features of accountability that you have? Yes. Is that ultimate accountability? No, because you don't control the relationship of employer and employee.
Right, okay.
And so it just depends on what you, I'm not here to suggest that you have that ultimate
Sure,
authority
sure.
either. And I don't want, and I'm sorry if I misled you into thinking that the only accountability that matters is control of that relationship. It's not. So I think it depends upon what level of accountability do we want to see as the county board? What do we want to see in terms of report and processes and so on? And then a conversation with the executive about expectations on implementation of these policies. And it's challenging. It's not easy. I'm not suggesting it's simple. And I can understand it's frustrating. I get it.
It's just hard to understand if you get down to the very specific wording, write a policy that is ultra specific and it is just ignored. What do you do? Nothing. If you refuse funding, then who's suffering? Not the person implementing it, the county is. The people who receive those services, the employees who work underneath the person not following those rules. It just seems like our hands are tied. We make rules for people to follow, but if they don't, oh well, we just keep moving forward.
Yeah, and again, I can't comment on the specifics here. I can tell you that's a conversation you ought to be having with your county executive about that accountability, and how you can build in a greater level of trust that whatever you establish as policy is going to be faithfully implemented through the executive's office.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was trying to avoid speaking tonight to preserve my voice a little longer, but with that being said, I think what you're hearing is a lot of distress and discussion around some of the challenges we've been discussing at the board level, not just at the committee level. And I believe we have the tools in our toolbox, and you said this, to administer policy and set the vision. I also believe we have the tools in our toolbox to hold those accountable to adhering to our policies. What we don't have authority to hold accountable for is those things we haven't put in writing. And that's what makes the job hard, is we have a tendency to rely too much on trust and not enough on the policy and what our intentions are. And if our intention is to buy a specific paver, and that is what we all believe we're voting yes on, then we should be making sure that that's clear in that decision and in that resolution that we're approving. So I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're clear with what our expectations are. And the same goes for being visionary. Being visionary requires us to think about, I'll call them policy loopholes, and how we could be had and feel like the victim. And you don't want to do that because you don't want to try to be political in these kind of roles where you're trying to get things done. But frankly, we have to be thinking through all the loopholes, because we're setting the policy agenda. We're setting those expectations for how people proceed. So I think you're hearing all of us air our dirty laundry, because we do have some trust issues that we're working on. But I think it is within our control to make sure that our policy reflects our expectations.
I will tell you, you're not alone in this struggle. If this was the only time I heard any of these complaints or issues, I'd be shocked. I hear this quite often. And I unfortunately don't have an easy path forward to say, well, all you got to do is adopt this ordinance right here and everything is set, go for it. Well, actually, I don't wish I had that till I'd be out of business, but it's not that easy. It's a lot of discussion. And I get it, it's not easy. And I get it, there's frustration. I get it, there's consternation. I get it, there's what can we do. I understand all of that. But that's, again, discussions with your county executive and administrative team about how do we move forward together, because if our goal is to work together, to have a cohesive unit delivering efficient and effective services to our citizens, that's golden. That's huge. That's what we ought to aspire to.
Supervisor Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This would be the point where I'd probably call the question already at this point, but since it's not something we're voting on. But I second actually what Supervisor Holt said. It is imperative of us to look at the policy that we're bringing forward to make sure it's specific to what we want. And at the end of the day, actually to Supervisor Halbert's point of what is our enforcement, it is power the purse string as a legislative body and elections. At the end of the day, those are your two enforcement mechanisms. So just always remember that as this body. I believe those are the biggest things we have to remember when we're operating in any way, shape, or form.
And I have to agree with you, because he was supposed to come for a half hour, and then we talked him into an hour, and now it's almost 2 hours. So I think we're going to call it at this time. Hopefully everyone got their questions answered. Otherwise, he is staying for the next period yet. Maybe you can get out back there. Otherwise, I wanted to tell you, so in case some of you don't know, that gentleman over there in the gray sweater, that's his son that's studying to be a lawyer, and he works for the county executive and for Marianne here for our corporation council. So, and he's doing a real good job and other stuff too. So
He's giving this presentation in 2 years.
okay, so so if you want to talk to him, I'm sure he can get some answers for you too. But
Right.
John Hintz. Okay, I'm going to take one more, John Hintz, because he had called in. So Supervisor Hintz, that will be the last one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to belittle any of the concerns, because I think we've all had some of these concerns, but we do also run into the risk of running into that micromanagement category when we start doing some of these things. When we say that, we're approving this for this exact model, again, when something comes in, when we approve money for something and the department head comes back and says, well, we came in under budget. Nobody asks questions. Everybody's like, all right, we came in under budget, because they knew what they were doing and they got something done for with better cost that takes care of the needs of the county. We have to have trust in that regard, because they're the ones who deal with those things all the time. And I don't necessarily say we should give them, carte blanche and just run away with everything. But again, we can't get too specific where all of a sudden we end up running over budget on things because we're being specific, or we don't have opportunities to save money and put money back into our general fund. So there's a real fine line that you run here, and I don't think we need to keep running as rampantly as it sounds like tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just briefly, I
Yes.
want to end by saying this. Thank you all very much for what you do. I've seen your paychecks. You're not doing this for the money. I know that. You're doing this because you love Winnebago County and you love the citizens that you represent. So thank you. Honestly, for somebody who serves county government, Sarah and WCA that serves county government, we appreciate your service. We really do. And if at any point you continue to have these discussions and you become increasingly frustrated and you think there's opportunity for us to help, call us. That's why we're here, is that we want to help counties. We want to help you get through some of these frustrations and issues. We have opportunities throughout the year for you to come and talk to your peers in other counties about these issues, talk to us about these things, and we're happy to come back to Winnebago County anytime to further this discussion. So thank you for allowing me to be here today, and thank you all. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Next thing will be, gotta get my glasses out because I lost my spot here. Honoring the retiring county employees. Now we'll go back. We always used to do this consent agenda. Well, we're going to go back and read these again because a lot of them had a lot of time in that end. We'll have a motion made by Supervisor Cox. We'll have a second. Then our clerk will go ahead and read about them, and then we'll vote. So Supervisor Cox, Resolution 065-122-024.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to bring to the floor Resolution 065-12-2024 for Williams Anthons.
Is there a second?
Second, Powers.
Thank you.
By Powers.
Lieutenant William Anthus started with the Sheriff's Office as a corrections deputy in April of 1995 and transferred to patrol in 1999. He was promoted to patrol sergeant in 2004 and to patrol shift lieutenant in 2010. He became the court services lieutenant in 2015 and transferred back to patrol as a lieutenant in 2021. Throughout his career, he served on many special teams and took on many extra duties. Most notably, he was a member of the Honor Guard, Crisis Negotiators, SWAT, Mobile Field Force, and Crisis Intervention teams. He was an officer in charge in the Corrections Division and a field training officer in both corrections and patrol. William will be retiring from the Sheriff's Office on December 18, 2024.
You got it back.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Carried. 066-122-024. Supervisor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring to the floor 066-12-2024 commendation for Deborah or Debbie Blankenship.
Second, Powers.
Thank you.
Debbie Blankenship started and ended her nearly 25-year career with Winnebago County as Economic Support Supervisor. During that time, she led staff through multiple changes in programs, policies, and many other things. She was a key part of the leadership team at Neenah Human Services. Countless low-income residents of Winnebago County have been helped with basic necessities thanks to the guidance that Debbie provided to the many staff she supervised over the years. Debbie's calm leadership style will be missed. We appreciate all she has done for economic support and wish her well in retirement. She will be retiring on December 30th of 2024.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Carried. 067-122-024.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring to the floor 067-12-2024 12/20/24 for Brenda Dittmer.
Second, Powers.
We wish to congratulate Brenda Dittmer on her retirement from Parkview Health Center. Brenda has worked as a certified nursing assistant at Parkview Health Center for just over 32 years. During that time, Brenda has worked with an array of residents from short-term rehab to long-term dementia care and everything in between. Brenda always provided exceptional care to the residents. She was hardworking and dedicated to her role. She had a great rapport with the residents and their families. In 2021, Brenda took on the role of restorative aide, where she worked with residents to complete their restorative programs. She worked closely with the therapy department to ensure the residents were maximizing their functional abilities. Throughout her time, Brenda has touched the lives of many residents. We are grateful for her time, knowledge, and dedication to caring for the residents at Parkview Health Center. We wish her the best on her retirement and adventures ahead. Thank you for the care and compassion you showed to each and every resident you cared for. You will be missed. And she retired on December 12th of 2024.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. 068-122-024.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring to the floor 068-12/20/24 for Kirsten Lemke.
Second, Powers.
Sergeant Kristen Lemke started with the Sheriff's Office as a corrections deputy in March of 1996. She was promoted to Corrections Corporal in 2001 and to Corrections Sergeant in 2021. Throughout her career, she has taken on many extra duties and special assignments. Most notably, she served as the jail's registrar and from 2012 until her retirement. This is one of the most important jobs in the Corrections Division, which acts as the liaison between the Sheriff's Office and the courts, probation and parole, and other agencies. She was an FTO, served as a Corrections Division FTO supervisor, supervised fingerprint and DNA collection, and supervised the inmate worker program. Kristen will be retiring from the Sheriff's Office on December 18th, 2024.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Carried. 069-1224.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring to the floor 069-12/20/24 for Lori Sealer.
Second, Powers.
Lieutenant Lori Seiler started with the Sheriff's Office as a corrections deputy in November of 1999 and transferred to patrol in 2003. She was promoted to patrol sergeant in 2011 and to patrol lieutenant in 2013. Throughout her career, she served on many special teams and took on many extra duties. Most notably, she was a member of the Honor Guard, Dive Rescue Recovery Team, SWAT, Mobile Field Force, and Accident Reconstruction Teams. She was a patrol officer in charge and a field training officer in both corrections and patrol. She was a humane officer and police motorcycle operator. Lori will be retiring from the Sheriff's Office on December 18th, 2024.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Carried. Consent agenda.
No, you have one more.
Oops, I'm sorry. 070-12/2024.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring to the floor 070-12/20/24, the combination for Dr. David Zirin.
Second, Powers.
Dr. Zareen has dedicated the past 25 years to enhancing the life of others. He has provided exceptional care and treatment for Winnebago County residents that needed him most. He has also been an asset to the behavioral health team in sharing his wealth of knowledge with the staff throughout the years. Dr. Zareen ensured that the patients he worked with had a voice and proper treatment and care. Dr. Zareen will be missed by all that have worked with him. He will be retiring on December 18th of 2024.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Carried. Consent agenda. Supervisor Swan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to pull 071-122-024. I'd like to ask for a motion.
Yeah, you can pull them right now before. No, because it was the other way around, then it wouldn't be a consent agenda, so. Go ahead, Supervisor Swan.
071-122-024 be pulled for discussion and possible amendment. Thank you.
Motion made and seconded. Settle, you do that?
Cassie's got it.
Frank, settle? Yep.
Cassie's got it.
All right. Anything else? If not, is there a motion to accept the rest of the consent agenda? Motion made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Carried.
What do you want me to read back?
Okay. Where is it here? Oh, the one you wanted to pull. See, it's not on here. Once you put it on, it's not on here. Whatever it is.
I can't get it to reorder. So what are you,
The one that he wants to discuss now.
you have to do the consent calendar first.
It's already done.
He pulled it, but you haven't voted on the total consent
Yes,
calendar.
we did. We just did it. Yeah.
Okay. So the one he's pulling is to amend 3.03.
Read it in there 'cause I can't read.
Okay. The item that Supervisor Swan pulled is to amend 3.03 of the Winnebago County General Code regarding administration and management of tax deeded lands.
I believe they're waiting for Mr. Phillips and what is?
Supervisor Cox, will you introduce this?
Turn me up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I bring to the floor 071-12-2024, the amendment, or the amendment of 3.03 of the Winnebago County General Code regarding administration and management tax deed lands.
Motion made and seconded.
Ms. Dowling?
Discussion. Supervisor Swan.
So first of all, I want to thank whoever put this together and wrote this up. I think overall this is a really good ordinance, and it's going to help us, especially because by adopting, should I say the state's recommendation? Or should I say the Wisconsin Counties Association boilerplate template? Okay. So I think this will help us in case, especially down the road, any changes need to be made. We can adopt those changes, and any potential lawsuits that might occur, such as what I talked about before, on Chapter 32, provisions maybe being ignored and need to be included somehow, can be done through the Wisconsin Counties Association, and then we can adopt that. So I think it's well-written overall, it's well done. There were just a few things that I saw in there that, I might want to recommend we consider amendment for, if I can find the page where I wrote it. Bear with me here. On number 2E, so in the second sentence, the appraisal may be made by a certified appraiser as defined in Wisconsin Stat 458017. I would ask we consider making an amendment to an appraisal shall be made by a certified, and I'm gonna say, the appraisals potentially, so you put that appraisal, after appraisal, you put parentheses S, in case you need to get more than one. The appraisals shall be made by a certified appraisers, apostrophe, parentheses S.
The only issue I would say, and I know I think Ken made reference to this,
Yeah.
the statute doesn't require that it has to be done by a certified appraiser.
I know that, but in our own ordinance here in Winnebago County requires that an appraisal be done by a certified appraiser, and to maintain consistency, I would recommend that the appraisal be done by a certified appraiser. The appraisal industry is regulated in Wisconsin. We need to be licensed and certified.
Right.
Why should the tax acquisitions be any different? An
Why?
appraisal for them?
And can I ask, and you want more than one appraisal done?
Well, potentially. So I'm just saying, put apostrophe S after, not apostrophe, parentheses S after appraisal and parentheses S after appraiser. Does that make sense?
Mr. Phillips, you got
That's your opinion, so I don't, do you
I
have-
mean, I guess I'd ask for an amendment, but go ahead.
This has come up in other counties as well in drafting the template that's before you, and this is, we went through various corporation council, other counties, treasurers, others to come
Right.
up with what you've got.
Yep.
The discussion point on this question of who is doing this appraising, because the statutes allow a committee to do it, the treasurer to do it, a delegated person to do it, or a certified appraiser to do it. I think that it's a question of risk, and when I say that, I mean that if you've got a 2,000 square foot piece of vacant property with 50 grand owed in taxes, am I worried about getting sued for a taking? No, not at all. I know it's not worth that. So I would say that in that circumstance, you'd want to say, okay, we don't need to spend the money on a certified appraiser because we've already put the money in through taxes that exceeds the value of that property.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Who else is qualified to write an appraisal except an appraiser? And if appraiser need be certified or licensed in Wisconsin, we need a certified appraisal. Okay, the definition of appraisal is an opinion of value.
But that's not what's required under Chapter 75. The definition of appraisal
Well,
under
don't call it an
75
appraisal then. It's not an appraisal.
That's not
Into
up
an
to me, it's
argument,
up to the
let's-
legislature. The legislature used the word. I'm just saying that the way appraisal is utilized in Chapter 75, it's not required to be by a certified appraiser. That's my only point.
But I'll come back and say, who else can write an appraisal but a certified appraiser in Wisconsin?
A committee, the treasurer, under Chapter 75, they have the authority to do that.
Well,
Vice Chairman Fari.
Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate Supervisor Swan's thoughts and comments. However, I might view this a different way. So let me ask two questions, if I might, of whoever chooses to answer it, I guess. If the owner of the property, now remember, this is all about the owner of the property getting part of the money from the sale back to them personally. That's where the taking clause comes in. Does the owner of the property have a right to challenge the appraisal or request an additional appraisal beyond what the county has established? First question.
No, not under the statute, not under the Constitution. But I
So-
will tell you that, again, if, for example, in Tyler v. Hennepin County, there was a lawsuit that said you don't get to retain that excess surplus, the difference between the sale price and what's owed in taxes. You don't get to retain that, county. And so the question in my mind, and the reason that appraisal, the concept is put in statute, is to make sure that the county is getting fair value, fair market value for that property. All right? It's not fair market value by any certified standard. It's fair market value as determined by either treasurer, committee, or an appraiser. So it's a risk mitigation feature as to the level of appraisal the county would feel comfortable with in saying, we've got fair market value here.
If the focus is to obviously occur our back taxes and the cost the county has gone through to take that through the process. So we'll call it administrative cost. If an appraisal is required by a certified appraiser, how much additional cost is added to that administrative cost, thus reducing the cost that actually goes back to the landowner or the receipt of that sale?
I don't know what the negotiated price of an appraisal is. I've heard numbers out there in the neighborhood of $400 to $500. I don't know if that's, I'm not in the appraisal business, but it would be whatever the appraiser charges. My concern, again, is that if we force that on all properties, as a county, we already have sunken costs in those properties that we know is not going to generate a sales price to take care of that. We're putting more money then in through a requirement that we have a certified appraisal that we will never get back.
I look at it a little differently. I'm looking for the more money for the poor on the person that could not afford
You
to
are
pay their
correct.
taxes and
You are
had to give
correct.
up a $200,000 home because they owe 50 grand in taxes. So I would like to see the owner of the property receive as much as possible while doing due process and justice to the county to receive their administrative costs. So that's why I'm saying if we're going to escalate the administrative cost, the person on the end who's losing their property receives less money. That's my concern. Would that probably be
That is
the
true.
result of that?
That is true. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Swan?
I'd like to follow up on, in answer to that. In a residential appraisal, the answer would be not much, and the quality of the report is going to be much better, and it will adhere to uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. If you have a broker or a non-professional do it, it's not going to adhere to that. So you may end up with higher proceeds back to the owner because you had a quality appraisal report done. So, you know, that's one thing. With commercial property, you know, to have an appraisal done by a certified appraiser is, to me, almost, I couldn't imagine it not being done that way. Again, in Wisconsin, we're a regulated industry. I don't see how you can go and ask, a finance committee to appraise a property. That just doesn't resonate with me. I mean, this is a regulated industry, and there's no reason under tax acquisitions we shouldn't comply with appraisal regulations any more than any other acquisition under, let's say, Chapter 32 eminent domain, or, you know, a bank appraisal. Why do they have to get certified appraisers and the taxing authority doesn't? I mean, I don't see how that can be. Thank you.
Second time, Vice Chairman Fari?
Well, thank you for your comments, Supervisor Swan. The Committee of Jurisdiction, I believe, was probably Personnel and Finance? Is that correct? Yes. Was this question raised and discussed at PNF, and if so, what was your conclusion?
We held off until we could get the ordinance passed, until we brought it to the board.
What do you mean you held off? So you decided not to include it in the ordinance?
We wanted to get the ordinance passed and then bring it back to PNF as far as the rem tax is concerned.
And then offer amendments to it at a later date?
If I may, that was the other agenda item for the issuance of surplus funds for a sale that took place in '22. This was the ordinance. This was the second item I brought to committee. Yeah.
We passed this.
Punch in?
I could do that. I'm ready.
We got another one ahead of you now.
So as I recall in our conversation in the Personnel and Finance Committee, our discussion was about getting this approved so that we had less unknown liability going forward. We did not discuss the specific language about who was authorized to provide appraisal. However, speaking for myself, I feel like the appraisals were reasonable. Again, I'm not an appraiser, but I felt like the appraisals were reasonable for parcels that the taxpayer chose not to pay on in these examples that we're using. They chose not to pay on because they found no useful value to these parcels. So they stopped paying their property taxes on those components. We found that we were in a bit of a liability position and at risk if we did not change our policy related to how we go forward and how we are able to document our expenditures. Is that fair? Like the net liability was going to be far greater if we did not get this passed.
That is fair, because we were talking about the 4 parcels that were not certified appraisals or didn't have certified appraisals because the cost that we already have invested in it, the property isn't worth it.
Right, over the course of 4 years.
Cover 2 meetings, one with Kathy.
Yes.
Yeah, and I believe it covered 2 meetings, one where I was not present, but the
Right.
assistant was, and then the second time I was present.
Right.
So there was extensive discussion.
Supervisor Swan, were you bringing something to the floor, or?
Yes, I'd like to bring what I had suggested before to the floor. I understand with the remnant parcels, there's an issue. The other parcels that we approved last month, I believe, were done by a certified residential appraiser. I would like to think that the discretion of the treasurer is such that, for the most part, consideration will be given to hiring a certified appraiser for tax deeded properties going forward unless you absolutely can't do it. Is that a fair question?
That is my intention to,
Okay.
in most cases.
So
do
then
that.
I will withdraw shall, leave it at may, but I would like parentheses for appraisals, not just one appraisal. Potentially, you could order more than one if you need to.
Are you making that amendment, or?
I would like to call for an amendment for the appraisal to be changed to appraisals, plural, with parentheses after, with parentheses S, okay? So appraisals, so you're maybe getting 1, you're maybe getting 2 or more, okay? You know what I'm
Is there a
saying?
second?
Yeah.
And then, a certified appraiser or appraisers, same thing. Okay?
Add an S after the
Yes.
appraiser.
And then I'm gonna acquiesce to not getting a certified appraisal on every property, but I'm gonna state with emphasis that for the most part, you should do that. Because we are the most qualified people to do an appraisal, which is an opinion of value, and we're a regulated industry in Wisconsin, okay?
Are there any other amendments, or is it basically
That's
just adding the
all.
plural?
The others relate to number F, but that's related to, if I can get this change in E, F will be taken care of because, you know, you can get more than one appraisal. Now, with regard to commercial property, I understand you're calling it at your sole discretion as treasurer to order an appraisal on a commercial property. I will suggest that on a commercial property, it is often more important to obtain an appraisal than residential property because you have an open bidding process for residential a lot of times. In commercial, you don't. Commercial, you have, you know, very uncertain value, very much uncertainty in determining value oftentimes. So what I'm saying is under
You're looking at?
under,
Supervisor Swan, you want to just tell us what amendments you're making so we can vote on them one way or the other? if you're not gonna make certain ones, then don't have to even talk about it.
Understood. All right, I'm gonna ask for an amendment to E right now, and I'm asking for a second on that. For plural appraisals, if you need more than one. You don't just want the floor, you don't want the bidding floor to be set by one appraisal necessarily. You might need more than one,
And
if it's a
that,
controversial property.
that dies for a second. No, I seconded. Oh, I didn't hear. Seconded by Supervisor. Great. Raise your hand. So now we gotta vote on that.
On the second, Mr. Chairman, may I ask a clarifying question to Amber? Does this complicate your process?
Adding an,
By adding the S or on the appraisals or the appraisers?
it might tie up a little bit more time scheduling those appraisals, but it shouldn't impact me too much.
Mostly you're not gonna need more, to get more than one, you might.
Right.
Sorry.
I just wanted to make sure that we weren't adding too much of a, so I maintain my second. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so motion has been made and seconded to go ahead and E, I believe you said E, to add an S to S's.
2E, isn't it? 2E.
2E. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Nay. The ayes have it. If there's any questions, we can vote by machine.
Now you have to.
Sorry, did we not have a discussion on that amendment at all? No. We have people waiting to speak.
Well, I apologize, that's my fault. We'll have to back up because there was no discussion. Thank you, Supervisor Halber. Supervisor Bender, I apologize. On the amendment, correct. On the amendment, Supervisor Bender?
Sure. You know, I rode by those properties, and I'll be honest with you, every one of them appraisals, in my opinion, were way high. I mean, and the house that was for sale for 70,000, there's a 10% buyer's fee on that. I don't care how many appraisers you get. You couldn't buy it for the appraised price. The appraised price was 70,000, but if you bought it for 70,000, surplus, charges you 10%. It costs you 77,000. So realistically, if you wanted to sell that house at the appraised price, you'd have to ask 63,000. Because whoever bid on that was gonna pay $7,000 more than it was appraised. I went and looked on that piece of land out on County Road B. You can't even get to it. You got $3,000 on a piece of property that's a private road. I wanted to see, maybe somebody would like it for duck hunting. What's a private road? You can't get to it. It's landlocked. You gotta go there by a boat.
That's the one that's underwater.
$3,000 for it. How many of those properties sold out of the 8?
Who's next? Supervisor Halber?
Yes, on the amendment, thank you. Question, so by adding these S's, it creates the ambiguity. I think that we need to vote down the amendment until there is a proper procedure that we can follow to add these S's, and that's just my opinion, because what happens is you get two competing certified, I don't know what that word is.
Appraisals?
Sorry. You get two certified appraisals in an instance where they're both competing and they're different numbers. What do? You take the highest, you take the lowest, you get a third one to cancel them out. There's no procedure on what to do in that instance where there's multiple appraisals. So by adding these S's in, we're creating that ambiguity in the text for us to deal with later. We need the procedure before the amendment. I am voting this down.
Supervisor Hanson?
Not on the amendment, no.
Supervisor Gustafson on the amendment.
Call the question.
Questions made and seconded to call the question.
There's a second right here.
I'll do it by machine. I know, it'll take her a minute, but that way there'll be no questions. Yeah. I don't even know how I'm gonna vote. Right. We can do that.
When you have an S, it's going to make it more confusing.
Here we are. So if you're for calling the question, vote yes. If you're not, vote no. Justin, we're calling the question now. I'm voting for calling the question. And it passed to call the question. 31 to 3. So now we're back on the amendment. To put the S's in. And 3.2 you said? 2.3, okay, 2.2. 2E. 2.E, okay. So, well, I don't have it in front of me. Sorry. No, that's okay. Pardon? We'll do it by machine. So, if you're in favor of it, vote yes. If you're not, vote no. No. Let's see this. Nelson? Supervisor Nelson? And that failed, 17 to 18. So that, yes, the S's don't go in. Is that it? Okay, so now we're on the regular resolution now, without the amendment. We'll do it by machine again. If you're in favor of it, vote yes. If you're not, vote no. Discussion, right, I'm looking for names up there because it's not on my number. Supervisor Holt.
Oh, no. Sorry. That was.
Supervisor Dowling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like it noted that Supervisor Swan was given 3 opportunities to speak on this matter, and I would like that noted in the minutes because I believe it's important for all supervisors to have an equal chance to contribute to this discussion.
I gave him the third one because he wanted to bring something forward, and I said that, and to make sure it's in the minutes, I asked him if he had something he wanted to bring forward, so that's why he got 3 chances.
Great, as long as it's in the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Lutz. Question has been called. So, you've been waiting to do that, haven't you? So,
I actually liked it.
so if you're in favor of it, vote yes. If you're, I need it. Right there.
I wasn't going to say.
Enough on that a second.
I wasn't going to give it a second.
So
But I
if
want
you're
the
in favor of
women to
it,
just
vote
do their
yes.
job.
If you're not,
Thank
vote
you.
no.
Follow
Vote on
your
your machine.
procedures and do your job.
No, we did it.
There is no more amendment, is there? There is no more amendments. The amendments are all over with. Yes. This is just voting on calling the question. So all those in favor of calling the question signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Carried. Are you ready now? You've been ready. All right, now we're back on the original amendment. So if you're in favor of it, vote yes. If you're not, vote no. On the original, right. We're on the original motion.
I would like to say she's done amazing, one of the teachers, and doing as she's.
And that passes 34.
Not a problem.
Oh, that's it, isn't it? Vice Chairman Fari. Click Vice Chairman Fari's. Okay.
Oh, we're good. First of all, let me reiterate Tom's comment about Merry Christmas to everyone. I'm sure I speak, Tom has spoken, but also the clerks and everyone else. So, Merry Christmas, everyone. Having said that, I will move to adjourn.
All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Opposed? We are